Okay, this is the presentation for Topic 5, Building Auditing. It's a part of the subject, Building Life Cycle Maintenance. This presentation is not by any means to act as a substitute for the topic study guide. It is merely a summary and an alternative way for you to understand some of the concepts and some of the content of this topic. Now, the subject is called building auditing. The question we need to ask ourselves, why conduct a building audit to start with? The building audit really is an overall systematic inspection and identification of physical and functional adequacies and inadequacies of the building. In particular, a building audit includes often the building's functionality, the condition, environmental performance, and the risk or legislative issues associated with how the building needs to operate. The information gathered during a building audit is extremely useful for it to feed into the life cycle process, to actually work out where you are, drawing a line in the sand, what type of condition, what type of risk is the building at now. And from that, then we can start planning short and long-term maintenance. So it's also critical information to start scoping refurbishment and major rehabilitation of the building. To try to scope the amount of backlog maintenance and identify code compliance deficiencies, fire, asbestos, PCBs, all those issues which are likely to cause legislative problems with the building and potentially bigger problems with occupancy and safety of occupants. In a nutshell, the building audit helps to document and provide a facilities manager and a building owner with a complete picture of the building's condition and risk status. So we might be considering the building audit for one particular building, or it might be for one of many in a portfolio of buildings. Having said that, we need to know how that building is performing by itself and in comparison to others. A simple graph here showing each type of building and the percentage of buildings by age is already a pretty good indication of where our problems might lie. In some of those buildings that we've got here, showing pre-1990 and 1964 to date, we can actually consider the buildings that are older are more likely going to have more problems, particularly with legislative issues, and maybe even performing to a standard that the current tenants or building occupants need. So after we've considered and reconciled all the building audit data, if we look at it from a strategic point of view, looking in, and couple it then with the data from previous topics, which is life cycling, we can consider that the building audit data will give us a line in the sand, what the building represents today in liabilities and defects and deficiencies. So we can apply dollar value to that, as we've done here in the graph. So 2011, we've got a total liability, which includes the backlog and refurbishment of building space. With the life cycle data, we can start plotting that out year by year. So if we do nothing and remain the same and don't increase the funding to meet that liability or total backlog, we can see the graph continually climbing, getting worse, getting worse, getting worse, getting higher. So that liability increases, and that really needs to be made aware to the property owners and executives of the building that make important decisions on maintaining, keeping tenants, and ensuring that the building maintains an adequate and competent standard for service. So before we go too far, let's consider the audit strategy. The building audit really, the purpose is to feed into the strategic asset management plan, which we talked about in topic 1 of this subject. So it helps provide the building and estate performance parameters for decisions to be made. It may be also required to help drive and assist a rectification works program and refurbishment program. So the level of audit that's required, whether it be a desktop, a walkthrough, a crawl through. It needs to also be clear about rating its condition, its function, and environmental performances for both short and long term. So being clear about the purpose of the audit, the level of the audit required, the next thing we need to consider is how to resource the audit. So resourcing the audit really means how many man hours, what type of management process, what type of software, what type of data management, and how is this going to be maintained as well. That's always a problem with longevity studies and life cycle studies, is maintaining the accuracy of that information and ensuring that when we go to look at it next year, that it's still relevant. We might also consider in the strategy then areas of integration. And what I'm saying here is it might be possible, and it is in most cases, to make performance management of subcontractors and preventative maintenance contractors, and that's including grounds maintenance, cleaning, energy and waste and so forth. It might be a requirement for them to provide audit data as a part of their performance-based contract. So some of that can actually feed straight into this audit program. So as I mentioned earlier, determining the level of the audit, that's going to be quite important. And what I'm saying is the level is, do we consider a desktop review, which is all the information that we have at hand, and making some assumptions and some calculations on the condition and the risk of that particular element, whether it be mechanical, whether it be the external facade of the building, whether it be the roof. The next level requires more resources, man hours, more data management, but it's a little bit more accurate and will provide us with additional detail, both for corrective as well as preventative feedback. And this is a site assessment, a walkthrough. So that may require site investigation on top of roofs, taking photos, and reporting back again in the same sort of elemental format. The level 3 is detailed examination. Now, to do detailed examination on a portfolio of buildings, or even on one particular large building, might not be feasible. So with detail, it might mean totally stripping down some of the plant and equipment, very time consuming, and sometimes putting some of that plant and equipment out of operation for a short amount of time. So in most cases, and what I suggest is, depending on the type of building and the facility that you have, is you might look at a cross-section of adopting all 3 of these, and that would determine then some type of accuracy overall, but some of those elements, external facades, roofs, or different types of plant, have more importance than others, or otherwise you can be pretty confident that some of those don't need as much detailed inspection as well. Before commencing the audit, we need to do some homework on the building itself and really understand what is the building, the basics, the basic data of the building. That is the type of construction, whether it's concrete tilt-up, whether it's brick with a tin roof, the date it was built. That will give us a good indication already, as I said earlier, on whether there's likely to be legislative issues that might come into play. Access to premises, fire protection, those type of things. The gross floor area, or GFA, the number of square metres of floors, very important. And the asset replacement value, which is the total cost of the building, the renewal cost, if it was built today. That asset replacement value plays a big role then in identifying when we have a liability. Once we start scoping and make an estimate, we can have that as a percentage of the overall asset replacement value. So it will indicate to us whether it's an important decision or an important area of deficiency in dollar value, not just in a risk rating from R1 to R5 or condition rating C1 to C5. Okay, we've got a good picture of the building with floor area and so forth, but we also need to identify the audit framework in regards to its performance overall. If it's one of building in a portfolio, then there might be components within that building that are more strategic, more important than others. It might be the operating theatres. It could be the central foyer. It could be components of plants such as the lifts, which are extremely important for the tenants and the operation of that building to achieve its business objectives. If it's a building by building strategic framework, then it could be a landscape store versus a biomedical building. Obviously then the strategic target rating will be higher for the biomedical building and very low for the landscape store. Establish a rating criteria for condition, and the rating criteria 1 to 5, excellent to very poor, is the most commonly used, and this is adopted by the Queensland Strategic Asset Management Plan, Queensland Government, and so it's an established rating tool already out there in industry, so it makes a lot of sense to adopt it straight away. With all this information being gathered, we need to consider a file structure, I suppose you might say, for the whole building. And by adopting an elemental format which is already heavily used and considered a normal template in the building industry, that's a logical place to start. This is the MPWC coding elemental system. And so by recording all risk, condition, descriptions of liabilities, and even costing those, it makes a lot of sense to adopt this in the building audit process. So we're not just condition rating the building, as I spoke about earlier, we're also risk rating as well. So risk rating also, to use the Likert scale of 1 to 5, catastrophic to insignificant, makes it very clear then once we're starting to go through areas of access, for access for disability, fire protection, lift plant, such as the car, the controllers, those type of things, that we can risk rate those according to legislation, and that will highlight to us once we start gathering all the data and reconciling the total liability. We can start looking at all those which have a risk rating of 5 and identify, well, these are very serious issues that we need to consider straight away. I've shown a slide here. I'm starting to talk now about asset assessment methodology, but I've provided here a definition of asset replacement value. I may not have explained it very well earlier, and it looks like on this slide I've also messed up the types set as well. But really, it's just to understand that the asset replacement value is the total cost of the building as it stands today, including the design, construction, and a new facility, how it should have been, and its current full replacement dollar figure. Once we've identified the dollar figure, the estimate of that liability or that deficiency, whether it be risk or condition or even functionality, we can then start looking at a facility condition index, and that's a very simple equation. And the facility index methodology then, as I've shown here, if the rating achieves a 0.097 to 1, then we can consider that excellent. If it's only achieving a rating of less than 0.8, which means that 20% of the building is in a pretty bad state of a condition, it means that then the building is very poor. As I mentioned earlier, we might also consider other types of ratings or gradings as we're doing a building audit, and one of them might be the functionality rating, along with the strategic rating, the SI rating too. The functionality rating, I must say, is quite often hard to determine. It's quite qualitative. I always sort of say it's like the taste of chocolate. Someone might really enjoy the taste and someone else might not. And that's sometimes the case here with functionality. What works for some people or some occupants, might not work for others. So we can functionality rate it at the time, but it is sometimes quite hard to bring that back to real dollars and compare it to, say, risk ratings or condition ratings. But it's useful to know, and it's useful to know if you're trying to compare components or rooms or zones within a particular building or a facility. Statutory compliance, a very important part of the building audit process, and generally, from my experience, it's important to make it very clear once you start coding your data is ensure that those items that you've identified on site or you've had people identify for you, that it's very clear that it's a fire legislative issue, it's an access or disability issue, it's an asbestos issue. It makes it very easy then to compare parts of a building or buildings in a portfolio, which ones are faring worse than others, and whether there's a problem overall that needs to be addressed very quickly. And if it does need to be addressed, where is it actually at? Is it in asbestos? Is it friable asbestos? Making it very clear in the audit is a great way of reconciling it again and document it for people that need to make those funding decisions and also plan ahead. So now we've looked at some of the condition rating tools and some of the methods or the method of actually reconciling the data. We need to then establish the extent of the audit. How much detail do we really need to go into here? The performance standards of a particular building and elements, that is to Australian standards or otherwise to the business that's occupying the building, and consider an audit template for the building. So is it going to be a one-off audit, or is it something that we're going to repeat year after year or on a 3-year cycle? As I said, assessment by elemental basis is the best way to go, and then condition rate this accordingly. And risk assess also, extremely important, and adds real value to the audit program. And then that way results can be compared against what is the business requirement. I also suggest that with the building audit is a good opportunity to start looking at the service maintenance history and programs as well. By taking this opportunity during the audit to look at the servicing of the plant, of the types of building components, we can then also consider whether, as a building owner, we're actually providing a safe environment for our contractors, and we can also look at issues with our service contractors that may not be getting picked up currently with our service people. So it's a great opportunity to see whether we're getting value for money in our service and preventive maintenance contracts also. As I mentioned earlier, resourcing the audit. Now, after we've gone through the elements, the condition rating, the actual strategic importance of each element or each type of building, we can then look overall and try to consider the process of collecting the data, the ongoing data maintenance, always a problem. And how's this going to be managed? How's it going to be updated? The analysis of the data, what's our benchmarks, and when is that analysis going to occur? The reporting process too, is that going to be annually, quarterly, monthly? And the audit frequency, as I said in the earlier part of the topic, is it going to be an annual audit for that particular type of element or the whole building? Is it going to be 3 years? Is it going to be 5 years? Depending on the importance and the strategic importance of that particular element or that overall building. And overall, and finally then, the data management software. Always difficult because each business operates a little differently, and so often it requires tailoring of that building data to suit the business, whether it be a retail outlet, office, university, a special industrial facility. So that's always important to take into consideration. If we consider the site recording, it might be as simple as a hard copy like this. This is the type of information that you might consider bringing back to the desk, to the computer, later on. And this site recording sort of template or format could have additional information that you might want to take when you're out there. That's not also including additional things like maybe destructive testing results. It could be sample testing, and it also could be things like photos and those type of things, or inspections of pipes, cameras going up pipes and that type of thing. But this information then could be captured on PDAs, on mobile phones, on laptops or tablets, and then pushed either manually or otherwise typed in manually or even via internet straight into the database. So if we consider the collection of all that data, what does it look like once we've got it all together? Now this is one example of how that data might look for a building once it's been all collected, once it's all been costed up, once it's all been rated. We can see a summary of the building, and that then will give us a calculation of the facility condition index or the overall condition rating. And as you can see here already, you're getting a gauge on that condition rating as you go down that part of the spreadsheet there. You can see those which are rating at 3, 3.5, 5, and that already gives you some indication straight away where the problem elements are, or where those elements are we might need to consider additional funding or additional resources. Another possible output could be an Excel spreadsheet or a report like this, and again we can see the element facility condition index for each one of those, and some of those there, the cold rooms and refrigeration, they're pretty bad. 0.62 we're looking at, but the fume cupboards, we're getting a condition rating there of 0.26. So something really needs to be done there very quickly, and once we start looking at the amount of backlog, over $1 million, and the ARV is 1.4 million, we've already identified a real problem area as a result of doing the building audit. The weighting up the top there you might be interested in too. So and that's an intelligent way of saying, well, functionality is important, but really the importance rating of the building and functionality, it's only 10 or 15% each. The condition and the risk, well, they need to be 25% or higher. So that's another important issue to consider when you're looking at your strategic requirements of the business. That also will then reflect on what we need to consider as important in the audit to push those numbers and push that data through in the report. I thought it was an important point here to make a note of a few things that you need to consider if you do happen to be doing a building or a facility audit at some stage. There's some issues of using internal staff versus external consultants and external contractors. One of them is local knowledge always. They know how the plant works or doesn't work and things like that. And also then skilling them up, getting people familiar to your buildings and your facilities. Areas around stairwells and circulation spaces, particularly if it's a busy building, and when you look at floor plans and commissioning information, handover documents, not always available in some older buildings. Also, the consistency from audit to audit needs to be kept regular, and it also needs to be consistent. So that's often difficult if you've got different people providing you with data. And making it clear, really, with what is high risk, and being consistent with that type of rating. A big issue I always find is being able to definitely determine what is backlog maintenance and what is a part of the routine preventative maintenance, and being clear in your mind which is which. And then finally, the backlog funds, keeping them separate to capital works. It's very important, as it's a true reflection, really, of how funding hasn't been attributed to the building, and also whether a full refurbishment or rehabilitation will help solve and resolve a backlog or a deficiency of items within the building and within the building elements. Okay, so now we've worked our way through topic 5. it's a great opportunity to read again through the study guide and refer to the subject text, course reading, or any recommended books and texts for this particular subject. You should also now be well on the way working through those workbook activities, and this is a good opportunity now to approach those and complete those for this topic. If you've got any questions, you can post them to the student forum, or otherwise send me an email.